Hello, everyone, and welcome to season 2 of the Hidden Talent podcast. Podcast, not podcast. And our first guest is Lukas Friedemann. Say hi, Lukas.
Hey, what's up, guys?
And I'm Felipe, as you know. And the Hidden Talent podcast is a weekly series of interviews with talented people, talented builders that mostly go unnoticed by the general public. We're talking about builders, creators, innovators that prefer to build in silence most of the time and let their achievements and kind of the impact they're making to speak for themselves. But we like to talk to them. And that's why our guest today, Lukas Friedemann, is a friend, but also entrepreneur, startup mentor, and advisor to startups. He is currently the co-founder of the Equal Food Company and also the chief product officer. And what else? He has been, when I met him, his company was Philisoffee, coffee company. And I think what's common between these two companies is that they're not your traditional tech, super scalable companies, but there's a lot of things that make those companies special besides those normal tech narratives. So, Lukas, hi, and thank you for accepting our invitation, for being the first guest of season 2. We have a lot of interesting topics to cover today, but before we dig in, let's give kind of a little sneak peek of who you are to our guests and our audience. Maybe give us kind of a short description of kind of your highlights of your career journey and kind of the changes that happen throughout time.
Yeah. Well, thank you, first of all. I feel very honored always to be on this show, and especially the way that you described the approach of hidden talent. I mean, that's certainly an honor to be on the show, and especially to be the first one in line. We'll see how that goes. In terms of my own career, I think what's really interesting and maybe relevant for you guys out there is the fact that there's been quite a lot of turns in my career, and that I don't have the typical background in the entrepreneurial space. At this point, I guess a somewhat accurate description would be to say that I've become a serial entrepreneur. So the past 9 years I've been spending working on entrepreneurial projects in different geographies, different continents, and extremely different sectors. So I started out, and this is interesting. So I started out as an entrepreneur, having had a background in international relations. So when I was younger, I was pretty convinced that I wanted to make a dent in this world and make a contribution for the better in the space of international development. So I studied international relations and international policy studies. My master's was out in California. And then kind of just through personal interest, got really interested in the immediate effects and how fast the turnaround times are in entrepreneurship and how much it can impact. And I think at the time, at least that was from my perspective, this topic of social entrepreneurship and doing good through social innovation, also outside the main countries, became really relevant. So that was the starting point for me. And then I basically took off on an entrepreneurial journey that took me from Colombia to Mexico to Germany and now to Portugal.
Thanks. That's a good kind of overview and a lot of interesting things and threads to pick up. But let's start kind of with the different kind of topics and subjects you chose to study. So you kind of already explained why you chose international relations, right? What usually happens after that degree? What were you imagining to be doing after studying that?
Yeah, I mean, so originally the idea of international relations, at least for someone like me, is to end up working in like multinational organizations. So think about the World Bank. Maybe if it's more financial, in the International Monetary Fund, it could be in governmental representations abroad. For a long time, I thought becoming a diplomat would really be very well aligned with my spirit and sort of like seeking the unknown, but also building on like past experiences and building bridges basically through development. So that was when I first started my career. That's kind of what I thought I would end up doing. The career diplomat it didn't have to be that way, but that's what I thought I would start doing. And then the reason why I actually why I was so certain that I wanted to study international relations was both just a huge calling in terms of, or interest in international politics and everything that was happening that required you to really understand local context really deeply and in a number of different geographies. And at the time that was, limited to certain countries that I've learned about. But it all started when I was doing my social service abroad from Bolivia. So I was working with handicapped children in northeastern Bolivia. And I was like, wow, if I can turn this like international experience, maybe bringing together like a deep understanding of different cultures and languages into the professional sphere, that would be fantastic. That mixed with my interest and knowledge of politics and international politics specifically, I was like, wow, that's my calling. And so that's how it started out. I did 3 years of that in undergrad, which went pretty well. I spent half a year abroad in Latin America, but in Buenos Aires in Argentina. So at that point, I kind of knew, well, if I want to focus on something, because international politics obviously like basically considers the entire world, I knew that I wanted Latin America to be my focus. And I think that really helped me to then like narrow down a little bit. I think it's very helpful for people in different paths of their career to at least know what you don't want to focus on. And for me, at that point, I knew, okay, everything else is interesting to me, but what I really loved and where I saw like the superposition of my personal interests and professional sphere was Latin America. So that was my undergrad degree. And then I actually, like after a couple of internships, including like embassies and a number of non-governmental organizations, I was like, okay, I definitely want to try out zooming in on that. So that's why I chose international policy studies as my master's and continue with a really deep focus on Latin America. And this was really, I mean, there's a huge thanks to the university where I did my master's at Stanford, which was that it was open enough that I could go and explore different subfields within that. And I think the space of innovation is really something that the university stands for and that it kind of reaches and everyone like gets excited about. And that also happened to me. So I think that was kind of the reason that I then moved more and more away from the more institutional approach to politics and more into the innovative space of what I would still today call like social innovation.
Yeah, that's you touched on a topic there, which was kind of Stanford and kind of the American way of teaching that kind of opened your mind to kind of new fields. And I mean, I kind of noticed the same while I was in the US, that compared to studies in Europe and I have experience with ones in Portugal, are much more specialized and focused on one thing, and they don't give you that chance to explore other areas, which can be helpful, I think, in my opinion, for two things. First of all, for you to kind of to validate and to understand if that's really what you want to pursue by just exposing you to different possible career paths, and also what you can bring to your specialty by knowing other knowledge areas. So in your case, that was what kind of opened your mind to kind of pursue, or kind of going from diplomat to innovator, so to speak.
Yeah, I think I learned a bit. My first summer internship was in Tanzania. I was traveling through all of Tanzania with Innovation for Poverty Action, which is already like really heavy economics and testing approach. So they're the ones that kind of revolutionized the approach of field testing at large scale, the different policy approaches in different constituencies. So this is for like development work. It was basically testing how successful is it really if we pay money, if we improve education through digitalization, whatever it may be, right? And I think that experience was also something where I thought, wow, this is very far away from like the institutional policy making approach. And I absolutely agree with you. I think one of the reasons that I actually chose to study in the US, and I mean, there's a huge downside with its cost, but I was fortunate enough to be able to finance my studies through a governmental grant and a private sponsorship. But outside of that, you're given so many tools to sort of like look in the different fields, and nobody's considered not expert enough, right? And it was exactly that openness and like the low level of barriers that allowed me to then jump into different fields. And one of the huge discoveries for me at the time was human-centered design. And I think in a past conversation I talked about, I think I totally admit to the fact that I kind of drank the Kool-Aid at the time, but it was such a powerful way. For those that don't know, human-centered design is maybe the best way to think about it comes from like product and service innovation, but the approach is essentially to deeply understand human needs before designing solutions, which in politics and policymaking, it's often done the other way around, right? Like big, powerful nations make a decision and implement a solution which they deem is most suitable. And I thought the playfulness, the openness, the rapid prototyping, everything that human-centered design stood for was extremely exciting for me. And we actually brought that to the policy school as well, but it really opened my eyes and allowed me to develop a completely different toolkit, which we then also used. I ended up doing a summer course at the business school, at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford. And then I was like, okay, I think I'm ready to take that turn onto the more entrepreneurial path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just kind of trying to think about those. So just kind of to do a quick summary, you were and are very interested on solving social problems. There's kind of two ways of solving, more than two ways, but kind of we're talking about two different ways. So one, kind of the policy making way, which is very top down and just can make decisions and laws, and then you see how they go, and then you review them like 5 or 10 years later. And you have kind of the bottom up approach where kind of starts like a grassroots way, starts in experimenting stuff, and maybe with the learnings from those experiments, you can kind of generalize and abstract that knowledge and turn them into policy in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary. I think it's essentially that, and I think one of the core pillars of entrepreneurship in general, right, is to learn fast. And I think to me, the overall process of policy is slow. It's institutional. It has to be passed by all these policymakers. And I think that's probably in general a pretty good definition of top down. It doesn't have to be, but the bottoms up approach, or working with a small group of people, right, and saying, hey, what is your need? How can we actually improve the hygiene conditions so that malaria doesn't propagate as fast? You might be finding completely different solutions that were formerly completely unknown to you if it's just a bunch of policymakers and maybe doctors sitting in a room and thinking about a solution how to best solve malaria in a specific town in eastern Tanzania.
Yeah. Now, I think kind of the next topic is, of course, focusing on entrepreneurship and kind of your journey discovering that. But before, I was just kind of realizing that and thinking about kind of your career and your journey as kind of a non-linear or non-traditional one, because you start with one field and you kind of experiment with other fields. You've done kind of almost unrelated things, but another thing that I was realizing that you have this kind of common purpose, so to speak. So all the things that you've done, at least the ones I know about, all kind of gravitate around this idea of social impact and solving social problems. So you did different things that help in different ways, but always with that kind of common purpose or mission that you kind of had in a way since the early days. So yeah, I was thinking about, although your career and journey and kind of a lot of the more modern careers do look like kind of non-linear or very kind of chaotic even, but in most of the cases they have kind of a common mission or a common kind of purpose behind them, but that is probably not very visible or for people kind of looking from the outside.
Yeah, so I think in my opinion, I would agree. I think that is most likely just the background of mine, which is like bringing about social change. I mean, that's what I think in that sense, my experience in Bolivia, studying Latin America as a continent, which is one of the most unequitable continents in the world. When you look at the Gini coefficient and like social inequality is just vast, right? And so always or like learning that and kind of internalizing that, I think is something that I took with me on the entrepreneurial journey. And my first step at Polymath Ventures, so I was basically finishing up my degree in policy studies, and a lot of people that I studied with then went on to work in international organizations or multilateral organizations. And I thought, wow, when I heard about Polymath Ventures, which at that point was basically a company builder to build impact driven ventures that could scale across Latin America, I almost couldn't believe it. I was so excited about it at the time because I was like, wow, that's bringing like together the two fields that like best defined my interest at the time, which was employing this newfound like methodology and very innovative approach of human-centered design, building companies with it, but having a massive social impact by focusing on a specific sector of the population. And at the time, the hypothesis, which is still very true in Latin America, is there's huge population growth. Especially certain economies like Colombia, which is where we ended up, are growing really fast, and inequality is decreasing as a result. But nonetheless, there's very little focus on what's often called the emerging middle class. And so the hypothesis back then was there is a huge opportunity to bring about social change by focusing like the innovative power and bringing new products and services to that underserved middle class. Mm-hmm. And that was extremely exciting for me at the time.
So, and you spent roughly 4 years at Polymath, right? So
yeah.
So where was Polymath located?
So Polymath started in Medellin, in Colombia, and then after 6 months, they moved their headquarters to Bogota, the capital of Colombia, which is when I joined. So I joined 8 months after it was founded, and when I found out about it, they had just gone through one process called seed, which is to set up new companies, and like starting with a research, like in-depth research process, uncovering unmet needs, and then building companies like by basically putting together, I mean, human-centered design, you would say you start with the desirability, and then you kind of look at the feasibility, the technical aspect, and the viability in terms of the economic model. So there's a lot of business model innovation when looking at, there's a big need in this part of the society. How can we engineer a new product or service that makes financial sense and actually brings about that change? And one example would be, we were working with single moms. Sorry, I'm blanking on the English word, but basically single moms that were going through really hard times, oftentimes raising kids by themselves in the middle class. And you look at what are their needs, right? They have financial power. They make a lot of the decisions at home, even if they are still in a relationship. But kind of what's offered in the market and what their needs and desires are for their kids and what their aspirations are in life, what they dream of, there's a huge mismatch, right? And so one of the concepts that we came up with was this after school care project for 7 to 12-year-olds, where kids could learn very innovative educational, or would be put in very innovative educational environments and benefit from what is called like development of skills that you don't necessarily learn in school. So technically it's like non-cognitive development. But that's just one idea. One example, right? So there's a lot of that, which is looking at what's needed in the society and how can we bring about change by building companies with a purpose and an impact.
So just maybe most people are not very familiar with venture studios or startup studios like Polymath. So can you kind of just briefly describe what your role was, kind of day to day, what you did, and also kind of what you learned during those years? So, and after studying in an international relationship, what did you learn about building companies with the kind of goal of social change?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question that would probably take a long time to answer, to dig into all of the learnings. But I think in a nutshell, I would say it was like an accelerated 4-year-long applied MBA. So, because it's a master of business administration in all the senses, that you go from an idea, literally a posted idea, to like scaling a business across multiple countries, which is the case for one of the portfolio companies nowadays, Elena's, which has been really successful in the Polymath portfolio. But I entered, quite frankly, as often in life, I entered with the wild card. I had, my language skills, which were definitely extremely helpful because I'd learned or I'd gotten pretty good at Spanish with my experience in Bolivia and in Argentina. And I came in with that set of skills and the skills of really having studied human-centered design and having applied it multiple times. And I think just the desire and curiosity to learn all the more business tools. And when I came in, I think the biggest learning is how much humility it takes and how much you are really just in the back seat when it comes to understanding people's needs. And rather, because we always discussed that it was not about just transplanting or copying an existing business model into Latin America, but really understanding the needs first and then designing a business that would be more suitable for the local context, right? And I think that the biggest learnings, I mean, there were so many of them, but I think one of the big ones in terms of structural, and that for that, maybe I explain really quickly how it works for Polymath Venture, or the concept of company builder is essentially, most people are familiar with accelerators or incubators, but company builder means that you come up with business ideas internally, and then you define sort of the scope or what the venture should look like. And then in most cases, you bring on board a founding team and venture capital to then actually grow out the business. So that means that over time, and which is the case now, there's 5 or 6 companies in the portfolio of Polymath, where there's still, depending a bit on the maturity of the company and also on the founding team, but you maintain a certain level of involvement in each of the companies, giving direction. It's almost like a sounding board, or even a board of directors, if you will, that gives input throughout the different phases of the company. So that's essentially the idea. And then, I mean, in terms of the learnings for myself, there were very functional learnings, such as going deep into digital marketing. This is unimaginable now, but Facebook ads were launched in the same year when I started to work with one of the companies. So, getting a deep dive into digital marketing at the time was definitely super revealing. A lot of learnings around leadership, building teams, hiring, firing, the importance of setting visions and setting aside. And I think this balance of how much you invest in learning cycles and reviewing what you're doing and still having enough bias for action, and finding that balance is not an easy one. And I think that's something that I can see through all the way until today. I don't think there's an ultimate learning or like a
I liked your analogy that comparing this to a MBA. So MBA, you mostly do kind of case studies and you study kind of cases of real companies. And in this case, it was more than a case study. You're actually building and help build real companies. So I think take the MBA to a whole another level. And yeah, so kind of this was kind of your the way you learn, kind of feeling comfortable to then starting your own businesses. I mean, we can go interested in understanding kind of how that jump, what made you decide to do that jump, which I think is for most people kind of a scary moment, or at least a moment filled with kind of doubt and uncertainty. Should I kind of leave a job and start my own thing?
Yeah.
What or when should I do that? So I think that's kind of an interesting moment to kind of dig a little bit deeper. And since kind of that means coming back from Latin America and back to Europe, right?
Yeah.
One question I had is just what does kind of, because you spend so much time in Latin America, what can Latin America, kind of the people in those countries teach us, kind of in the West, Europe and the US, teach us about entrepreneurship? So, well, the question is, so what most kind of entrepreneur stories come from the US and Europe. So what do Latin American entrepreneurs, how are they different, or what they can teach us based on kind of your experience working with them?
Yeah. I mean, a lot, I think. I certainly have my personal bias as well. Maybe to answer your first question first, which would be, so my role at Polymath was also a bit unique. So essentially the way you have to imagine it is, every now and then, or every 1.5 years, we would build 2 or 3 new ventures. We would assemble the founding teams and take care of the investment, especially the initial investment for each of the companies. My case was a bit different because I ended up working, all of my roles were strategic with Polymath, helping the other ventures, but that was only 10% of my time. The other 90% was working full-time in a founding role at one of the different ventures, one after the other. So my first one was working at a car repair shop for 14 or 16 months, followed by working at an after-school care project for another year and a bit. And then I opened Mexico as a country manager. And I think all of those, I think one of the big learnings and big like skills that I took with me as well is, one, having the confidence to sort of go off of insights and knowing that if you study the market and it may be even only 2 or 3 months that you've really dive deep into trying to understand the market, but you get a really good sense of what's happening in a country, in a specific sector within that period of time. And I think the same goes for hiring, the same goes for fundraising. I think there's essentially I think if you understand, and that's the very definition of the word polymath, which is something that we had spoken about before we started this interview, but having a deep enough understanding that you know enough for the field, but without necessarily being an expert with 5 to 10 years of experience, allows you to really go into a research process with human-centered design to then jump into hiring a person that, maybe the future CEO of the company, and go out and raise money for one of the existing portfolio companies. And I think because as long as you bring it all back together and you have business intelligence and the deep understanding of a market, that's a very convincing portfolio of information, I would say, that you can bring to any of those areas, whether that's hiring, whether that's business building, or fundraising. And I think also very specific skills like business modeling and understanding how you assess whether or not a company is viable, I think came along with that. In terms of the second part of your question, what
what's
learn, or what we can learn from what's different in Latin America. I mean, the truth is, at first, I think there's big challenges, because of like less economic stability, less political stability, less deal flow. This has all dramatically changed in the last 3 to 5 years, which is more or less since I've left. But the big cases like Philisoffee, that most people may have heard about now, big companies that have scaled across Latin America, have brought more like investor certainty into the continent. But until then, there were definitely huge challenges, and the biggest ones were certainly related to risk capital and finding the right talent, because people look for more stability, especially. And I think in the US, you know this very well, but people are like, everyone wants to work in a startup, I feel like. And in Latin America, when we started, this like balance between how much risk do I want to take today and how much am I willing to like give up for a potential outcome if this company is successful one day, it's much harder. In terms of learnings, or what was very unique about the region, I think the entrepreneurial spirit is much more ingrained in society, I think, because we don't have these careers of certainty, and you don't like having a good career and working in a decent job doesn't mean that you've kind of like sorted out life for yourself. So I think the bias towards action, the being driven, I'm even my roommate who didn't study an entrepreneurial career at all, he's a graphic designer, but his willingness to go one step further and sort of like build his own projects on the side were always super inspiring to me.
Yeah.
Besides that, I think that,
No, I think that connects perfectly kind of with where we were going, which was asking you kind of what made you decide to make the jump between having a job and launching your own company. And that's a really good insight. So when people have less certainty about their careers, they're much more willing to kind of open businesses and start projects and be entrepreneurial because they're less to lose, I guess, at least. So I think that's an interesting take. So in your case, what kind of made you do the jump from leaving Polymath and opening your first company?
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a confluence of factors. And I think the one that stood out the most at the time was that I was convinced, after having gone through the experience and knowing how intense entrepreneurship can be, is that I wanted to find a model in which, one, I was investing my time with 100% certainty in a project that represents that kind of future I would like to live in. So I think sustainability and building companies that I was fully convinced were really making a huge impact on society was instrumental for me. I think then learning certain things that I didn't agree with in terms of the leadership and strategy. I think a big takeaway that we didn't speak about earlier is focus. I think the more you focus, the more you are able to output. There's always the risk of leaving big opportunities on the side. But I think we overstretch ourselves in terms of resources at Polymath quite a bit in each of the individual companies across the portfolio. And then there was also a personal factor, which was I had been abroad at that point for a total of like 6 or 7 years. And I think that the idea of building my own company in a country a bit closer to home and to family, especially at the time, was definitely very appealing. And I think that the biggest driver for me was really, I had learned, and you see so many deficiencies, and I'm not saying I'm far away from nowadays, like doing everything better, but you just see opportunity to do a lot of things a lot better. So I think the excitement of saying, hey, I want to build a company that I think can run or can incorporate a lot of my learnings and do the things better that I thought weren't done as well in other companies that I've worked with was really a huge incentive. That, like, with that, I have to also highlight the fact that at Polymath, even though I was technically employed, but I was the first hire after the 5 founding partners. And very soon I moved up into a senior role. So it was very close to actually having founded or co-founded it. And then I was in founding roles in each of the ventures that we built. So it wasn't like an employee job. It was very entrepreneurial in itself. And I think that just nurtured my my risk appetite as well. And I was like, I know I can, I'm definitely learned that I'm not too risk averse. I like the risk. I like the challenge. I like to challenge myself. And I think the biggest one is I want to keep growing. And I think I want to keep growing in a personal career that allows me to constantly seek new challenges and contribute to personal growth, so that one day, and that's a bit of a personal vision of mine, I can actually take some of those learnings and help other entrepreneurs that are maybe in an earlier stage of their career with their decisions.
Yeah, in your case, I was just thinking, of course, this decision made sense because you had the pains of a founder without the rewards. So you're living the founder life without the possibility.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, without the possibility kind of the rewards in the end. So it makes sense, kind of the move. Yeah, let's talk about kind of the next stage. So you had two startups after that. Philisoffee first, then the Equal Food company now. Both of them kind of in the same kind of macro industry, so to speak, food and beverage. What made you decide for this particular industry? Was it kind of by chance, by design? How did that happen first?
Yeah, I'm going to try to summarize this really briefly because there's a lot of reasons that went into it, but I would say cold brew coffee for me, so Philisoffee was the company's vision was to bring innovative beverages with high quality coffee to the German market, inspired again by trends in the US and the UK, Japan, where cold brew coffee is a huge trend because it's simply put healthier for the gut. It contains more caffeine, and it's just a different drinking experience. And I like the innovative character of that. And ultimately, my vision was to say, hey, I have had this experience. I have these connections in Latin America, and to build an innovative product that then can actually transfer back some more value to the source, to the coffee, because we all love coffee, but it actually comes from a region that's pretty distant for most of us. And so that was the long-term vision, to say, we build a product where people over time identify a lot more with the core ingredient of what it is, rather than just drinking. Our competitive product at the time was Red Bull or Coca-Cola, which is nothing but sugar and water, and try to at least get that buzz out of natural caffeine and add some more value to the source where it originally comes from. And in a more general way, I think food or beverage, and then later food, which is sort of like the connecting thread between Philisoffee and then Equal Food now, is that it's something that's very close to our day to day. When I was working in a car repair shop, I've only once in the US for 2 years, I owned a car. But outside of that, I hadn't owned too many cars. So it just felt like a service and something that was much further removed from my personal life. And beverages and food in general, I think, is really something that brings together community. It's sharing moments. It's emotional. It's experiential. And I think there's something absolutely beautiful about it. So when we had tastings of our cold brew coffee, and people would say that it's the best cold brew they'd ever tasted, or you tell the story of the farm where the coffee was sourced from, that really, was very inspiring and very beautiful. It was also a company that was really focused on branding, and I've always had a personal affinity for that, for like good storytelling, beautiful brands. So that was the cold brew coffee world. And then Equal Food was essentially, I'll get to that afterwards, but a lot of it also had to do with the founding teams. But Equal Food in essence was an opportunity to stay to get even closer to the food world. So it's something, that touches all of us and every day. We can eat every day, and it's so important. And to be able to make a durable impact in the space of food, when we know that 1/3 of all food goes to waste, nowadays it's estimated to be 40%. and to say, hey, we can actually build a business that can help farmers generate additional income, help people spend less on their groceries, and at the same time actually be more sustainable with their consumption, was almost too good to be true. One of my big learnings from Philosophy was that I think cold brew coffee was so challenging in a market like Germany because it was too far removed from existing consumer habits. So people like hot and cheap coffee, and to go from hot and cheap to cold and expensive is like, to me, like 2 degrees of separation. So it's too far away.
Yeah.
Whereas in the fruit waste business, you're saying you get the same fruits and veggies. They're just a bit crooked. They're a bit weird looking maybe, but you pay much less for it. Then you don't have to challenge people as much, even though I love it to challenge people and to really bring about change in habit. But I think that's much, much more difficult. So the easier way to get into a market and to find product market fit is to be as close as possible to existing habits.
Yeah, that's a good insight, and I never kind of thought about both your projects in that way. And like you're saying, Be Cool Food was very heavily dependent on branding and storytelling for you to kind of to challenge and to change those habits and to justify why. I think you explained it very well. Why should you pay more for a coffee that's cold? Yeah, that's a challenge, but it's of course difficult, and I think it takes time and it takes a lot of resources and money to kind of to change those perceptions first, and then those habits later. So it's either you kind of go and kind of surf that wave, that bigger trend that someone is pushing, and kind of you wave that as a small company and as a startup, you ride that wave, or it's much more difficult. And well, just kind of so that people kind of understand what happened with the Philosophy, kind of what happened to the company, and kind of what was your takeaway from that journey, the Philosophy journey?
Yeah, I mean, so it basically came to an end after 2.5 years, because we realized that we were confronted with a very fundamental decision, which was to go much more in the direction of a cheap, mainstream, probably sugar-based and less sustainable product, or to stay in such a niche market that the numbers just wouldn't make sense. And like cold brew coffee, there was a lot of people that we spoke with that were all saying that like the breakthrough of cold brew is just around the corner. But that was a saying that remained the same for like 5 to 7 years. I think today people would still say the same thing. The truth is there was never a major breakthrough like there was in the US, and we bet on that, right? It was a calculated risk to say, if it comes, we're probably able to position ourselves as the most sustainable, maybe also the most attractive brand, certainly the highest quality. My co-founder is a beverage technologist, which most people don't even know that profession exists. And we were well positioned, but the truth is you have to also at some point read the market, and the market was telling us it's just too small. And for a beverage company to be successful, you're not talking about like not even hundreds of thousands of units. You're talking about millions and tens of millions if you ever want to get anywhere. And for that to be true, you need to be something that's widely accepted and a big part of your consumers. And that wasn't the case.
Yeah. And how was the kind of that decision process? How easy it was kind of to, I don't like the word quit, but kind of to make that decision of investing your time and effort in something else that you could have probably get a bigger impact.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely.
I bet a lot of people go through the same kind of process, and of course, there's always 2 sides of it. One side, which is you need to be resilient, and you need to be kind of go through all those steps. But of course, there's the other side, which is seeing what you saw and seeing that the best decision is applying your effort somewhere else.
I mean, I think it depends a bit how you're looking at life in general. Sometimes, not to get too personal, but I think it's not so different from a relationship. You can, after a massive breakup, you can walk away from it and just talk about how you've lost the most important person in your life, or you can look at everything that you've experienced with that person and the person that you have become as a result of dating that your former partner. And I think that the same thing applies to me in philosophy, because I thought I had, after learning about entrepreneurship for 4 years, and applying it, as you said, in the most applied way at Polymath, I thought I had already learned so much that now it was just applying it and starting through with it. And then you see other challenges arise. And I think the learnings from building your own company in terms of finding the balance between spending time selling and being out in the street, which, it's a beverage product. So ultimately it's about sales. Like you have some backbone, but then you have to sell it. That and the analytics of understanding how much you're selling, how you can improve that is not an easy one. And then you want to balance that with creating an organizational, like a culture, a place that people like to work at, being innovative for what you do. So you want to be present in a lot of different festivals or different types of events. So deciding, we could easily spend half of our time just traveling through Germany, promoting our company. You could easily spend half of your time selling the product to bars, clubs, supermarkets. And you could easily spend half of your time just focusing on analyzing how you're doing. So you end up with way too much on your plate, and making those calls of where to focus your effort and setting very strategic goals and saying, this is what we're going after for the next 3 to 6 months was probably one of my biggest takeaways. Along with, there's cycles to everything. And when we learned that we were at this watershed moment of, are we going to sell this company? Like, are we going to go down this path? And there were some investors that were interested in taking us down the path of the cheap, like canned product that is very easy to drink. Let's call it that way. Much closer to existing products. I think it was a fairly easy decision for me to say that's a path I don't want to go down. With my founders, and we had a heart-to-heart conversation, and then decided that it wasn't really an option for any of us. So that's when we decided that it was time to let go. And to answer your question, I mean, we essentially very specifically had to file for insolvency at some point, and then ended up selling the company. And yeah, that's heartbreaking because you've put so much sweat and time into your project. But again, as I said earlier, as long as you get enough learnings out of it, and it ultimately brought me onto the path of now building, meeting you, and moving to Portugal. I'm building a maybe even more exciting company today. So I think it all makes sense.
Yeah, you're mentioning learnings, and that's kind of because one thing that I think, in my opinion, that usually prevents people from making those kinds of decisions is kind of that the sunk cost bias of more effort you put into something, the least likely you are to kind of quitting. But looking at it, like you were mentioning, kind of what learnings can you take from it? What kind of knowledge, experience, people you can take from that company to your next company? So it's actually not cost, because your time and your effort is not all thrown away. It's you taken a lot of things from that experience that live beyond the company. So I think that's a good kind of framework to have when making those decisions. What can you take, even if the company stops existing? What can you take you to your next journey?
There's actually another way, now that you say that, I think of looking at it, which is at any point of your career, I think to stop and ask yourself the question, am I doing the right thing with my time and like the people that I work with and the type of company that I work on? And I don't think that the answer to that question, if you answer that question with, well, that depends on the outcome in 3 years, then you're running a big risk. And I felt like that, to be quite honest, I felt a bit like that with Polymath sometimes. Whereas if at any given point in time, working on the company that you're working with, and you are completely fulfilled at the moment that you are thinking about it, then the answer to that question can be very different, right?
Yeah, and I think also it comes down to what we were saying in the beginning. So it comes down to your values and your purpose, your
Yeah.
career purpose, so to speak. So if your purpose is bringing about social change, it's pretty easy to make this decision in that case,
Yeah.
because the path you had, kind of the choice you had, was going away from your purpose. And so, yeah, it always helps having a clear purpose or values to help you make those difficult decisions.
Not too long for too long on it, but I just wanted to say one more thing because I think this is a really, really cool point for people to also think about frameworks. But it's just so many people think about when they choose a career, what can I do with that next? I would have never thought that I would study international relations to then become an entrepreneur, right? And I think when you always just think about like the functional part of it, or when you think about or you can think about a career first in terms of salary, in terms of type of company, and maybe in terms of schedule, or you can turn the whole thing upside down. And this is kind of what you're saying. Start with values and with environment, and think what are the kind of people that I want to work with? What's at the core of what I do? And then I think the outcome of that can be completely different in terms of your career decision. So I think that's a really good point that that sometimes maybe not so like clearly in my head, but always internally to probably apply it.
Yeah, and even applying that framework kind of completely revolutionized the way we kind of think about education and how you choose your degree of your university. So having kind of that framework of identity, and this is something because most people go throughout their lives without ever kind of identifying kind of a common thread about purpose or values, and of course it is a very not an easy thing to do for most people, and some people kind of get a bit anxious because they don't know what their purpose is. And I think if you're lucky, you can find it early, but most people don't. And I think kind of as you go from job to job, from company, or from project to project, you'll kind of iterate and refine it.
Yeah.
So kind of, it's like the finding your career purpose is a journey in itself. So
Yeah.
you're looking for it, and as you go, you kind of start eliminating things and getting a bit more clear, a bit more focused.
That's how I always thought about the beauty of internships.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to love your internship. If you know that you're never going to want to work in that, actually, the Peruvian embassy was like that for me. I was like, after that internship, I was very convinced that I never wanted to become a diplomat.
Yeah.
And that's great because you've eliminated one of the big, back then that was even a vision of mine, but you've eliminated that one. I don't want to do that. And then maybe also related fields that are very, very similar to the diplomatic career, eliminated.
Yeah.
Great.
People
should be thankful for that.
That happened. Exactly the same thing happened with me. So I also had kind of a 1-year internship after my degree in kind of consulting, and it was super clear that wasn't the path for me. So I mean, it was super helpful. So it's the best internship I could do, is like eliminating a complete career path. But yeah, let's go and focus on the most exciting part of your career now, about Equal Food. Just give us kind of a brief kind of rundown about what Equal Food is today, and maybe after kind of what the origin story is.
So Equal Food in essence is a food waste project. So we buy fruits and vegetables that are considered imperfect or ugly by industry standards. Thereby, they contribute to a large amount of the food that's being wasted. So as I mentioned earlier, it's estimated that between 1.3 billion and 2.5 billion tons of food go to waste every year around the world. And one of the reasons why this happens, there's a number of different reasons along the supply chain, but one of the main reasons is that farmers are not able to sell their full harvest, either because of imperfections or, and that's the minor part, also surplus production. So what do? We basically partner up with a number of farmers all across Portugal and a couple of farmers in Spain, and we buy their second category or imperfect produce. And then we assemble that into 4 or 5 different types of boxes every week. and we ship those boxes to our individual customers. And so our customers are able to buy fruits and veggies at a discounted price. The last time we did the price analysis, the saving was 36%. And you get, so you save money, you basically buy more sustainable produce and support regional farmers. And you have the convenience of having that box delivered to your doorstep, with a very optimized route without any plastic in your box. And we're talking about 12 to 13 kilos of fruits and veggies every week on your doorstep. So that's essentially, that's in a nutshell what we do. We also work with some restaurants on the side that buy second category produce. So avocados, for example, and oranges, and we deliver to a number of different offices as well. So they have their imperfect fruits or mostly fruits at the office. But the vast part of what we do is these weekly boxes, which we deliver in the greater metropolitan area of Lisbon and in Porto.
Yeah, it's super clear and exciting project. And I mean, you just touched on some of the different kind of social benefits, which are, I just kind of realized a new one, which is kind of all the plastic that goes into the value chain from leaving kind of the producer until it reaches your table. Of course, you can see all the plastic that's used in the supermarket, and that's a lot, but I bet there's more plastic used in the value chain, and just kind of, and even the product changing hands more often. It probably shows that the product is less fresh and probably older than.
Exactly. I think one of the innovations that we don't even talk so much about, but it is the fact that, and most people don't know and don't have to know that either, but in supermarkets, for them to work, there's huge supply chains behind them, right? And so when you buy your veggies at the supermarket, they have usually been on a number of different intermediaries first, which means a lot of time. And our advantage here is that we are working directly with farmers. So oftentimes, I mean, I love the case of our mint, for example, or our lettuce, because it's harvested Monday morning. It gets to our warehouse Monday evening. On Tuesday morning, we pack the boxes, and at Tuesday afternoon, as early as 2 p.m., you could have your lettuce. So it's maybe been 24 hours or less since that piece of lettuce has been harvested that you receive it at your doorstep.
Yeah, and one thing that I was thinking before we talked today was the kind of this idea of course, it is kind of super interesting. The benefits are super clear and tangible, and you can see kind of the help that you're making. But the kind of the trying to argue for the other side in a way is that it's not a very kind of scalable business, very operational heavy. And of course, we could use a lot of more companies like yours. But how do you look at it? How do you look about this idea of building less scalable business, building almost like, not old school, but kind of businesses with more traditional or logistics kind of model? How do you think about scale? Is scale important to you? Scale, and I mean the scale of the impact, not exactly the scale of the company by kind of business metrics, but of course having a more scalable business means you can help and can provide more impact. So I was curious just to ask you how you kind of think about those things, because a lot of the narrative in the conversation these days is about big tech, about super scalable businesses, and which is almost like that idea of fast and slow and kind of.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting conversation, and I would employ the word maybe super scalable versus scalable, because I definitely think that our business is extremely scalable, and I will talk about that in a second. It's not super scalable, just to employ that
Not
word,
that,
in the sense that
yeah,
it can
not
be
like exponentially scale. Yeah,
exactly.
like in 1 year conquer the world.
In 1 year, it won't reach the entire world. That is true. But I think, yeah, I mean, philosophically, I think there's big questions always. I think there's a big game that's being played in the space of what for me is part of, like maybe like hyper capitalism as well, right? Of finding projects that can scale globally very fast, and where a lot of people benefit very quickly from that growth and expansion. And I think in my worldview, there's definitely a lot of space for companies that have scalable impact, because I do think if for us, we probably wouldn't be doing this if it were just a local project that cannot exist outside of Lisbon, for example. I think that wouldn't be enough for Alberto and myself, which I can talk really quickly about our founding story in a second as well. But yeah, I think it had to be more than that. But I think the impact that we can reach, I mean, so far we've saved 220 tons of food from going to waste. And that if we manage to reach multiple cities in Portugal, so maybe add another 2 to 3 to Lisbon and Portugal. We want to launch in Madrid within the next 6 to 12 months. And if we then can reach multiple cities in Spain, then it's a pretty scalable model that can actually prevent a lot of food from going to waste. And when you look at the US, for example, Misfit Markets or Imperfect, there's actually two large players that are pretty big companies nowadays, and they compete for the same market. I mean, the US is always, it's such a different ballgame, just because it's so large of a market that you can cater to. But if we were able to cater to 2, maybe even 3 countries in the future and set up the infrastructures for that, and manage to absorb food waste from all of like southern Spain, which is where that's basically the productive area or the agricultural area that feeds all of Europe, right? And we're located super close to that. So that's a very important factor for us. And if we take all of the regional farmers from Portugal and a big part of the farmers in southern Spain, then we're talking in terms of supply, in terms of veggie supplies all year round, we're talking about a pretty large part of agricultural production, right? I think that Spain and Portugal together, if I'm not mistaken, I might have to look this up, but account for 30 to 40% of the agricultural output in the EU. So it's quite something. And then you could even think about how far you can scale it within Europe. Then it's going to become more a competitive play, because in France and Germany, you have some companies that exist, but I think we're certainly well positioned for that.
Yeah. When you mean kind of agriculture, is like fresh vegetables and fruit, right? Because
exactly. It's
grains and cereals are kind of another.
It's probably more. Sorry, no, I'm talking. Yeah, that's a good point. It's fruits and vegetable production.
Yeah, but you touched a really good point, which is kind of that hyper growth kind of trend, and the impact that does is mostly on the shareholder side, not on the customer side. So they grow very fast and they make a few people a lot of money. And you're mentioning kind of this more sustainable and slow way of growing, but you can actually have more impact on kind of on the social change side you were mentioning, or on the customer itself, than of course just on shareholders and investors. That was kind of a good.
That's a great point. If I can elaborate on that one really quickly, I think 2 dimensions actually that we don't talk so much about, but one is, well, that's actually just saying what you just said, which is using Equal Food as a platform to destigmatize imperfect produce, right? To tell people, hey, there's food that's being wasted for no good reason. Even if you have a slightly cut off, or if your zucchini is a bit bad at the end, you can just chop off the end and you can still use 90% of the zucchini, and like taking away a bit of this relationship that I think we've developed with fruit and veggies. I think for that we have an incredible platform, and we have had really good engagement on our social media channel, especially on Instagram. And then there's a second part, which is that and this is very detailed about our operational model, but we've been working with a group of collaborators that come on a weekly basis to help us pack the boxes. And this is something in terms of the social impact that we have that I absolutely love. And that's being in a country, I'm German, my co-founder is Spanish. So we moved here 2.5 years ago, and to now work with 20, 25 people every single Tuesday to help us pack the boxes. At the moment, we're working predominantly with senior citizens, so 65 years plus, that come and have a great time because they're no longer employable and have a lot of time and energy in their hands. So to have that level of impact, even on a very small scale, and then talk with them about imperfect produce I think it's really great. Yeah, definitely rewarding. Great, it's subjective, but rewarding for myself, sure.
Yeah, and that's another kind of way which you're kind of bringing about social change, about bringing kind of and just kind of last question about kind of the scaling is: do you see yourself in the future more kind of as maybe a tech company is too strong, but almost like the operational framework that other people can use locally, kind of a more decentralized approach, or more kind of centralized, or you kind of opening markets and kind of controlling everything?
My own role or the role of Equal Food?
Equal Food.
Yeah, I think that's a bit to be seen. I think what we see is a bit of a hybrid model. So you need a certain level of centralization to be efficient and to, for example, for the deliveries. I mean, we started out doing the deliveries ourselves, and at some point you need to get to a certain level of scale so that it makes sense and that it's more sustainable actually than people driving or going to the supermarkets on their own. But I think what we envision right now for a next step in terms of expansion is to have some a number of central hubs, and us still acting and employing the best practices at a central level, but then distributing and working with different groups of regional farmers, for example, for in the different regions that we work with. That would be sort of an ideal operational model.
Yeah. And no, I was just trying to imagine how Equal Food would look like if it was kind of a tech company. So even kind of the people that do the deliveries, the people that pack the boxes, the people go to the farmers to pack the fruits could almost all be kind of just almost kind of gig workers, the people that follow an app like on Uber. I don't know if that's the most sustainable way, but thinking about how we could scale. So seeing you almost like as the logistics and the operations part that tells someone what he needs to do, when and how, and they just follow the instructions and do it.
Yep.
And you can have the same kind of way of having volunteers and people helping kind of this mission of sharing the word about food waste and doing something about it, and also being rewarded for doing so, but being rewarded almost task-based. But yeah, that's kind of my
very interesting. Yeah. But I do think that we're slowly moving in that direction. As you hire, they're operational, the type of business that we're talking about, and ours for sure is very operational. But once you manage to have one extra management layer that can take care of your operational day to day, then you're able to move to another level and do more of the things that you just described.
Yeah, it's kind of my brain already lives in the Web3 decentralized world. So I'm always thinking about how can we decentralize.
Maybe we're going to have a follow-up chat on that specific topic. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like that utopian view. Wrap this up. So we went from the Diplomat and policy making in the US, then to learning entrepreneur in Latin America. That very practical MBA. Then he came back to Germany, started Philosophy, and cold coffee brew company, and then Portugal and equal food and fighting food waste. So just a few more questions. And kind of the final one, just to close your journey, is kind of what do you see in your future? So what do you think are the kind of the next steps in the next couple of years? And after that, so do you see yourself going all the way with equal food? Do you see yourself starting more companies in the future? Do you see yourself in a more mentor or advisor role in the future? Tell us what can we expect?
Yeah, I probably a bit of a mix. I feel like I have a big thirst for innovation and for challenge and growth. So I will very likely stay on the entrepreneurial path for quite some time. What I'm not sure is about the operational model or the specific role that I assume in that, because I already know that right now I'm working with the Impact Hub as a mentor, and I've really enjoyed being able, as I said, I think quite some time ago now, of like passing on my knowledge and past experience to people that are maybe stuck or at an earlier stage, and maybe also in complete different industries, right? Just the way that you talked about it. And I mean, we've experienced it together working with a number of entrepreneurs of how much of a toolkit you actually develop and how much like transversal knowledge you develop over time that you can apply in a number of different subject areas when somebody is an entrepreneur themselves. And I think that's something that really excites me, to help other people break through certain areas, or to see really hidden talent or extremely well-talented people, but they may be lacking, let's say, business model experience or financial experience or human-centered design knowledge or the part of the vision, or maybe they don't know how to treat like money and raising money and putting that into a company, and being able to insert myself into projects that I believe are really worthwhile supporting and backing is definitely a role that I see myself in. What I don't know is if that's in a more active or more passive role. You know, it could be in a form of an investor, it could be in the form of an advisor, or it could be in the form of just a very loose mentorship agreement. But that's certainly something that I will do more of. And in terms of the entrepreneurial path, I'm certain that I want to do more for myself as well, because the excitement, the adventure that comes with it, the fact that you never stop learning, I think it's something quite beautiful about entrepreneurship that I haven't been in the corporate career yet, but I can't really see myself going back to it either.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. I was also asking that because you already launched your token on Talent Protocol, and that's kind of one key part I think that people are interested in, is knowing what your plans are, what your goals are, and usually that's the missing piece in almost everyone's kind of resume or bio. Everyone talks about what they did, but and sometimes that tells you more about the person, what their ambitions are and how they plan to get there, than where they've been in the past. And yeah, but it's also it is of course very important to know it, but most people cannot really express it. So it's not something we kind of spend that much time thinking about. Like we were talking about, think about purpose and values and what's kind of the best use of my time to achieve that purpose. But yeah, that was why I was asking. And also, of course, people can check out your Talent Protocol profile. We'll put the links on the description, and also invest in your career and in your mission of bringing about social change. I
have actually an idea of how to look at it. I think one thing, let me see if I get the equation right, but I think what I would love to see myself in the future is to maximize the amount of impact that I have in relationship to the time that I spend on projects. So I think right now, when you're an entrepreneur in your own project, you maximize impact, but you're not really particularly like efficient with it, right? Because you have to do so many things. And I think the beauty of being involved in a number of different projects is that you can really maximize your input if it's very punctual and specific input in different areas. And I think that's a goal for me for sure, to get better at that and to provide that input to then reach more impact in more than just one organization.
Yeah, I think that makes sense for me as well. I think the question there is how do you measure impact, just to make sure that you're getting better? How do you measure that impact? But that's a reflection for later. But yeah, Tell, of course, I already mentioned that people can find you on Tell Protocol, of course, but where else can people kind of find more about you or Equal Food? And if they live in Lisbon or Porto, maybe try one of your boxes.
If you live anywhere between Ericeira and Setúbal, or in the greater metropolitan area of Porto, then I highly recommend for you to check us out on equal.food on Instagram, or equalfood.co, not com, co on the internet. About myself, I haven't yet gotten around, one of the future goals as well, to writing more about my entrepreneurial journey. So far, best way to contact me is through LinkedIn, Lukas Friedemann. And yeah, other than that, I'm always available for a chat, and always super curious. And I spent most of my time in Lisbon, and outside of that, every now and then in Berlin. Probably where you most find me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lukas. I mean, we could stay here talking for a few more hours. But I think we covered very interesting topics, and some of them that I wasn't expecting. And I think you did a very good job of trying to synthesize kind of your learnings into, I think we got very good snippets of knowledge that people will enjoy hearing. So yeah, thank you so much for your time.
And thank you. Thank you once again for the invitation as well.
This podcast is sponsored by Talent Protocol, the Web3 professional network where anyone can invest in high potential talent.